我会觉得美国的《纽约时报》或者美国的有一些《Washington Post》、《New Yorker》等等，美国的媒体到现在为止仍然有一个非常了不起的行为，就是他们从来不以国家安全或是爱国为名义，而遮掩这个国家错误的行为。对他们来讲，真正爱一个国家的方法是让这个国家更好，更重视人道。美国在2019年3月18号的时候，美军在叙利亚巴格兹附近发动了一系列错误的空袭，导致平民的死亡。80个人死亡里头有64名是妇女和儿童。美国的军方掩盖这件事情，《纽约时报》从旁边辗转听说了，深入的调查，绝不放过。最近公布了美军如何欺瞒这一场军事行动，误杀了这些平民。对《纽约时报》跟对《Washington Post》或是我们在了解的什么叫做民主政治来讲，他们是最好的一个示範，告訴大家，當一個國家做錯事的時候，好的媒體為了這個國家的好，一定要揭露。
أنا الألوان من بلدة عمري 10 سنين من عمر الثورة。
10岁大的阿尔万没有一般同龄孩子天真的笑容，因为从他出生的那一刻起，他的国家叙利亚就没有过一天的和平。
على كل حال الجيل اللي مثل علوان ربيوا بالثورة بظل الثورة اكتشفوا الدنيا على أصوات القذائف وأصوات البراميل المتفجرة.
The story of Syria this past 10 years begins and it ends with this man, President Bashar al-Assad. It is the story of an uprising against him, brutally suppressed by him. It's been a war which has changed our understanding of brutality. It's shifted politics well beyond its borders, and it has left the country and its people broken and divided.
叙利亚内战引来各方势力介入，包括欧美、俄罗斯、土耳其、伊朗等，或金援，或出兵支持政府军与反政府军，让战事变得更加诡谲复杂。战火也让 ISIS 和基地组织趁势崛起。时任美国总统奥巴马与川普先后在任内派兵叙利亚打击恐怖组织，但每次空袭都是正义的吗
？On March 18th, 2019, U.S. aircraft heavily bombed those ISIS fighters, whom the U.S. says were threatening to overrun the SDF and had already caused 30 casualties. U.S. military says it launched an investigation that initially determined the bombs had killed 4 civilians and wounded 8, that they were in legitimate self-defense and proportional.
纽约时报资深军事记者大卫·菲利普斯揭开了美军滥杀无辜的内幕。
There was a secretive classified ground unit that called in this airstrike. And it claimed that it was a self-defense strike, but there was another part of the U.S. military, an Air Force drone that was hovering overhead, and it was taking in the scene in high-definition color video. And so people back in the command center were looking at this video, and they didn't see really any combat. What they saw was a very large group of what appeared to be mostly women and children, essentially seeking shelter in a low-lying area. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't fighting somewhere, relatively nearby, but certainly not in this immediate area. And then without warning, they saw a F-15 fighter jet streak across and drop some very large bombs right in the middle of this crowd. And when some of the survivors tried to stumble out of the aftermath, the jets came back through and killed them as well. The person whose job it was to sound the alarm was a legal officer, a military lawyer in the Air Operations Command Center. He was one of the people who saw this high-definition footage. It was reported to him by other people as a concern, and the regulations required that he reports it up the chain of command. When he did that, essentially, time and time again, he was told, we're not going to do anything about this. Don't worry about it. Just drop it. This officer is a lieutenant colonel named Dean Corsack. He refused to drop it. He tried to take it to the Air Force's version of the FBI. They wouldn't do anything. And so he eventually took it to the independent watchdog of the military, the Department of Defense Inspector General, and said, you've got to do something with this.
纽约时报花费数月重组机密文件和报告中关于那场空袭的细节，并采访直接参与者跟拥有最高机密安全权限的官员，得到了美国军方领导层一心掩盖此事的结论。
The investigation that was done was an investigation done by the same unit that called in the strike. Essentially, they're grading their own homework. And so maybe not surprisingly, what they decided is, hey, yeah, this was a mistake, but not a big deal. It was never reported up to higher authorities. It was never looked at independently outside of that unit, and no one was ever disciplined for it.
美国军方曾经将针对伊斯兰国的空战描绘成史上最精确、最人道的轰炸行动。军方还表示，每一份平民的伤亡报告都经过调查，并且会公布调查结果，开辟了军方所说的问责模式。然而，2019年3月发生在巴格兹的那场空袭表明，显然不是这么一回事。
The slaughter and displacement unleashed an exodus not witnessed for decades. And the vacuum left in parts of rebel-held Syria was increasingly filled by the black flag of the Islamic State. The group conquering large swaths of Syria and Iraq, murdering, raping, and pillaging in the name of a twisted theology. Ethnic minorities recounting horrific stories of sexual enslavement and torture. And while the Syrian people were crying out for help, the world largely stood by and watched.
They need to stop thinking that somehow the Americans or the West are going to save them. The U.S. Air Force is not going to start bombing Damascus.
历经烽火连天的10年，这个昔日的文明之都早已面目全非。当人们再次提起叙利亚，只剩下战争与难民。
شعوري يعني أنا حاسس بس بدي أكمش بشار الأسد بدي يصير هتلر. بدي أعذبه. ما بدي أقتله، بدي أعذبه، بدي خليه يدوق السوا فينا نحن. بدي دوقه المرارة تبعيت العذاب اللي عذبنا إياه.
还有失落的下一代。
谢谢你收看今天文茜的世界周报亚洲版和欧洲版，明天见，拜拜。